Welcome back to Walk with TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial who is eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on education, sport, and culture. Today, we are walking with a trilingual professional, international education leader, and doctoral student. A District of Columbia native, she moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, where she earned her bachelor's degree in Latin American Studies and Spanish from Macalester College. After graduating, she moved to South Africa, where she worked alongside University of Cape Town faculty to develop strategies that would encourage exchange among international and South African students. She later returned to DC and earned her master's degree in tourism administration with a focus on international education from George Washington University. She currently serves as the director of the Ralph J. Bunche International Affairs Center at Howard University. As the director, she provides guidance and direction towards comprehensive internationalization. She also administers 4 programs dedicated to increasing the representation of systemically marginalized and historically underrepresented communities in foreign service and development. When she's not working as the director, she's completing her doctoral coursework in the Higher Education Leadership and Policy Studies program, also at Howard University. A quick Google search will reveal that she is a leader, really the leader in preparing students of color for global leadership and activism in addressing racism and internationalization. Her social media will remind you of Howard Forward, Study Abroad So Black, and World Domination. But she always leaves us with one question. If HBCUs were born out of a movement towards justice, what should international education look like at HBCUs? And on this walk, we're going to talk about it. So without further ado, y'all help me welcome future Dr. Tonija Role. Dr. T, what's poppin'?
Nothing, that's great. Thank you so much. It's really great to be with you.
I appreciate it, Dr. T. Check this out. I love doing research, and people, they're going to hop on this episode and be like, whoa, we switching gears a little bit. And the answers, of course, y'all saw this coming. But in my research, I saw you were featured on Fulbright, Finland, CNN, Chile, France 24. You just like a regular thing for you?
It was interesting. I mean, all of that I can only say is because of my ability to speak Spanish. And I am a huge advocate of foreign language learning, especially for the melanated ones. And I've been taking Spanish since I was 6. Didn't take Spanish throughout my whole educational career, except for now in the PhD program. This is the first time I'm in school and not taking a Spanish class. But throughout from first grade till I graduated college, I was always taking Spanish. And so, I'm essentially a native speaker. And so for certain things, people have decided to call on me for some thoughts and analysis. And a journalist in Chile got connected to me through some other people in my network. She was looking for different voices to talk about different things that, people in Chile aren't going to hear, people in Chile are not going to hear from typically. And so she invited me. So most of those interviews happened during the election cycle last year, leading up to election day, and the election or the selection of Kamala Harris for VP. A lot of attention got paid towards Howard. So a lot of international news outlets wanted to know more about Howard. And so because I speak Spanish, I got called. So that's what that's all about.
I'm glad you bring that up. And that's why that was the first thing I mentioned earlier in your introduction, because my mom does Duolingo. She's been doing it for like 2 years straight. And she lets me know she does not miss a day. But when I was doing research, yeah, she's a beast. Shout out to Leslie, she's a beast. But when I was doing research on you and I found the CNN interview, I said, whoa, she speaks Spanish? And I had to check and get my own assumptions, which we're going to talk about on this podcast. But then 2, I was always teetering between like, I want to learn Spanish, but I wasn't willing to put in the work to relearn Spanish. And once I heard you speaking Spanish, I said, oh, no. I gotta flip the switch. So all the shows I watch now, Money Heist, Elite, Monarca, I watch them in Spanish with English subtitles.
Excellent. Good job.
I'm gonna get there, yo. But check this out. Check this out. This is going to be a phenomenal conversation. One that we can learn more about your story, your research, your practice. But before we go any further, segment one, what's your story?
My story is kind of circuitous. But as you mentioned in the opening, I am a proud native Washingtonian. There are not many of us, so I will start with that. Born and raised here in Washington, D.C., not in the suburbs, not in Maryland, not in Virginia, in Washington, D.C. And, grew up here. Like I said, I went to public school in D.C. until about 5th grade. And in that school, they had Spanish for native speakers and Spanish for non-native speakers. There's a large Salvadoran population in my school. So they had the native speaking Spanish classes, and then they had Spanish for the rest of us. And that's when I started learning Spanish and I got hooked. And I wasn't good at it at first, but around about 3rd grade, I was like, I can do this better. And so I decided to commit and never look back, really. My brother, who was a year and a half younger than me, came through DC public schools as well. But by the time he came through, they didn't have the Spanish program anymore. So he doesn't speak any Spanish. So it's really remarkable. And that is one of the reasons why I'm such a huge advocate for foreign language learning, is because of the way that I was introduced to it and the way that it kind of evolved in my educational life, and then the way that it shaped my academic future. I did an exchange program in high school the summer before my senior year. In high school, I went to Stone Ridge, which is a Sacred Heart school here in Bethesda, Maryland. And the summer before my senior year, I participated in the Experiment for International Living, which is a high school exchange program offered by the School for International Training out of Vermont. And that experience just completely changed everything. I had wanted to go to Sevilla in Spain that summer for the World Fair. I wanted to be in Spain on an exchange program because the World Fair was there, but it was cost prohibitive. And so they gave me a scholarship, but they're like, we'll give you a scholarship, but you got to go to Mexico. You can't go to Spain. So I was like, okay, fine. I'll go. I just want to go somewhere. And if that wasn't that was a blessing, really. I fell in love with pre-Columbian culture, the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Olmecs, and live with a family in this little town on the Gulf Coast that I'm still in touch with, and have gone back a few times. Most recently, probably the last time I went there was probably like 7 years ago. I took my whole family to meet my Mexican family. It was beautiful. It was amazing. So that was really, I think, a transformative period, because before that, I had been studying and speaking Spanish my whole life, but I wasn't confident and I didn't feel comfortable speaking with anyone. I was like 2 people in the world that I would feel comfortable enough to speak Spanish with, and that's it. But after that trip, I had no choice but to speak Spanish because nobody in that town spoke any English. And so if I wanted to do anything, I had to talk to them. And so by the time I came back from that trip, you could not shut me up in Spanish. I was speaking Spanish to everybody. I was listening to Latin music. People were like, Tonija, you are not Mexican. I was like, I am honorary Mexican, okay? Because I love Mexico. And I still love Mexico. So that was just a really important experience for me that shifted everything. That's when I decided I was going to be a Latin American studies major. And Spanish, and it shaped everything. And then I went to college, studied abroad in the Dominican Republic, and then grad school, finally got to Cuba, and made some life decisions in terms of career choices and directions, and have ended up here at the Bunch Center at Howard, and it's amazing. So that's my story in a nutshell.
This is good. I'm glad we're starting there, because the first question I have is that language is one thing, right? Studying a language, some people say they want to go teach a language in a high school or middle school, whatever. But you found your way into this international affairs, international education space on purpose, and really with purpose. And so what is the connection between the language learning, particularly around Spanish, and how you then transition and currently work in international education?
So I think for me, the language has been a bridge. So on that first experience in Mexico, I was on the Gulf Coast of Mexico in Veracruz. And Veracruz, you know, people are like my complexion, maybe a little bit darker. But when you think of Mexico, people don't generally think about Black Mexicans. They don't think about Afro-Mexicans. But there's definitely a Black presence in Mexico. But when I went to Mexico and people was like, oh, you know, like, what are you? I'm like, yo soy negra. I'm Black. And people were like, really? No, you're not Black. You're like morenita. And so thus began my education on race in Latin America, which is very different from race in the United States. And so for me, language was the bridge to allow me to explore more deeply what race in Latin America is all about. The ability to talk to Black people from Latin America in their own language without filter is, for me, it's invaluable. Like it's a different level of connection that you just can't get if you really, I mean, yes, you can talk, you can communicate with people, like, you know, you can communicate with people in the language of art and music and all that. It's great and it's wonderful. But I really want to understand like what people are going through, what they're feeling, all of that. And you can only get that really if you're able to really sit down and have a conversation with people. And that happens through language. So I learned Spanish in college. I was like, I need to learn Portuguese too, because Brazil is the largest country in Latin America. So if I'm a Latin American studies major, I need to speak Spanish and Portuguese. And so I went and took all the classes in Portuguese at college. And I don't speak Portuguese like I speak Spanish, but give me 3 days in Brazil and I'm good. And I don't get confused between the Spanish and the Portuguese. So,
wow. Well, okay, this is good. This is really good because I'm still curious to like, what was the moment, I guess, that launched your career in international ed? Because you studied Latin American studies, you came back to GW and studied international ed with tourism. Like, what was that moment?
So, it all started in the trip in Mexico because I was like, how somebody is going to make a living doing this? And somebody has to make a living doing this. Why shouldn't it be me? Yeah. And there were only 3 people. There are only 3 Black people on this program to Mexico. And so I was like, whoa. And this was at a time when I remember there was a lot of conversation about like students not going to college, dropping out high school, particularly students of color. That was like a really regular conversation happening in the world, in the United States. And I remember coming back from that program and thinking to myself, I have got the solution. This is the solution. The solution is studying abroad. The solution is getting students in high school to have an experience like the one that I just had, because the next logical time they'll be able to have it is if they're a college student. So then they'll go to college. It was like my solution to college enrollment issues. Unfortunately, the field was not ready to hear that. So all of the professional associations that deal with international education and study abroad were focused on higher ed. NAFSA and others were only focused on higher ed. And I was sitting here like, everybody, you gotta start earlier. Like the Asia Society, they have a partnership for global learning, and they're probably the only organization at the time that was even thinking about K-12 global education. And people have people have realized NAFSA started having sessions on K-12 international education at their annual conference, and there's much more regular, still not a whole lot, but a lot more regular recognition and acknowledgement that all of this that we talk about in higher ed really needs to be starting in K-12. You have to get kids hooked much earlier. You have to start that language learning earlier. And then the natural progression is, if they are hooked, they're going to want to keep doing it. And the natural progression is, where can you do that next? It's in college. So go to college. So that's that was my whole, like, that's what got me really riled up, was trying to figure out why K-12 space was not really paying attention to it. And, DCPS has been, I think, a pioneer in the global education space, launching study abroad programs for K-12 students that are fully funded. So it does not matter what part of Washington, D.C. you come from, what your socioeconomic level is. If you sign up and, get accepted into these programs, you can spend 2 or 3 weeks abroad for free as part of a DCS program. Obviously, the pandemic threw a wrench in all of that, but it was going along quite well before, and I hope that it will resume soon.
Most definitely. Most definitely, because the school where you did the trip to Mexico, that was at the Catholic school, right?
Yeah.
This is good. I'm glad I bring this up because I also had an international experience in high school. I went to Ecuador for 10 days. Phenomenal experience.
Yep.
It was a Catholic Jesuit high school as well. And I asked that because this concept and practice of privilege. Right. And so Catholic religious affiliated private schools may have the money, may have the resources, the connection, the capital to be able to create these partnerships. You mentioned DCPS, but other public school systems may not have, similar sorts of connection. Yeah. And so how do we create more comprehensive opportunities for students in public schools, kids in public schools to have this opportunity as well?
Well, first, just to clarify, I attended a Catholic school, but I didn't go to Mexico as part of any program of that school. I did the Experiment in International Living, which is a separate program. Wow. World Learning is the umbrella organization. School for International Education is like a university in Vermont, specifically for international education. And then Experiment in International Living is their high school arm of the organization. And I just wanted to go somewhere. And so I just, on my own, just started researching and figuring out who does stuff for high school students. I want to go somewhere. And I found them and I applied and got a scholarship. And that's how I got it. It wasn't with the Catholic school. But your point is well taken, because yes, I mean, the opportunity to have an experience like that in high school is few and far between for a lot of students, because it is cost prohibitive. And you see the same thing in college. They're connected. So, I mean, I think DCPS's program is a pioneering program, and I think it's a model that should be replicated. They find funding, and they pay for everything. Even if the student doesn't have a suitcase, they will buy a suitcase. They pay for everything. And it is precisely to overcome this privilege that, is unfortunately not evenly distributed. And so it evens the playing field, giving this kind of opportunity and exposure to all kids in DCPS, no matter if they come from Upper Northwest DC or, Ward 8. So it doesn't matter.
So as we progress through this conversation, Dr. T, future Dr. T, you mentioned your role now, the director at the Bunch Center, but there are obviously previous stops that you made prior to getting there. So can you just take us through some of those experiences you had prior to becoming the director at Howard?
Well, when I'm at the top of the show, I mentioned that it was a circuitous path. I left, after college, after I came back from South Africa, actually during college and on and off for the next 12 years, I worked for a restaurant company, Jose Andres, the chef that is like saving the world every day that you turn on the television, through his World Central Kitchen organization. I worked for Jose for 12 years and that whole company. And it was a great experience, great company. And, one doesn't often think of food as kind of or hospitality industry as a path to where I am today. And it took me a while to figure it out myself. But when I think about what it is that I'm interested in and what I really enjoy, what I enjoy is connecting people. And so in the restaurant business, I was able to connect people with an experience around food from a region of the world that I am, particularly fond of, Latin America. In the case of the restaurant that I worked at first, actually, I worked at Jaleo first, but Cafe Atlantico was the next restaurant, which was part of the company, and that food focused on Latin America. So I was able to, lots of people that work in a restaurant spoke Spanish, so I got to practice my Spanish skills every day. And the hospitality industry in and of itself, I think, is very humbling, and I think it leads to great servant leadership skills, which I left the company as a manager. So, that kind of leadership skills were certainly strengthened having worked in a restaurant like that, but I also got to have fun. I remember on a couple of occasions, like Valentine's Day in particular, I was trying to figure out, I was like, I got to bring my Spanish language degree into this dining experience somehow. I was like, oh, hey, how about we focus our menu on Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate book? Let's take recipes from that book and, make them. And then it's like, we could put quotes from the book on the table. And they're like, yeah, let's do that. And it was fantastic. It was a huge hit. And the next year, I think we did Aphrodite by Isabel Allende. And it was amazing. So that was exciting, like to be able to bridge my two worlds at the time. And so then after that, I had my first child, and the hours of the restaurant business were not working well with the child who didn't sleep through the night yet. And so I was like, let's make a shift. And I had wanted also at some point to work in international education. And so I just kind of put an APB out to all the networks of all my friends and family, and, did some informational interviews and so forth. And then eventually landed at an organization called Phelps Stokes and was working on the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program, which is an exchange program for mid-career professionals. I just wanted to be an exchange because, like with the restaurant, I wanted to connect people. I like to connect people. I like to connect people who have similar interests, career, whatever the thing is, figuring out who needs to talk to who and making them get together is like one of my greatest joys. And so I did that for a few years. We worked on Latin America, particularly people of African descent in Latin America. So again, I got to bring in the language and the regional interest. But Phelps Stokes is one of the oldest Black organizations it's no longer exists, but it was one of the large oldest Black organizations in the country. And there was we did a lot of work around international education domestically for Black students, particularly students at HBCUs. And we actually had a program called Ralph Bunche Societies, which operated in a couple of different HBCUs. But I left there and I went to join the Baobab Fund for Racial Equity, which is a Brazilian organization serving Afro-Brazilian civil society organizations. And I was their North American executive director for a couple of years. And then I landed at Howard. And all of that for me is, it's a little bit circuitous, but the theme is connecting people, but the theme is also Black people throughout the diaspora, connecting them. I want us to be connected. And again, circling back to the language is how we can be connected.
I love it. You writing my script for me, Dr. T, segment 2. Segment 2, how are you, yo? What is your role? Like, what do you do? For someone who doesn't know anything about international affairs, know anything about international aid or comprehensive internationalization, like, what do you do? What's your role?
Ooh, so my role, so we do have the fellowship programs that you mentioned, the Rangel, Pickering, Payne. And now we have a couple of others from the Department of Agriculture. I'm not really involved in those day-to-day, in the day-to-day running of those programs. Those are masterfully managed by Patricia Scroggs and other colleagues. But because they live in the Bunch Center, and because the focus is diversifying the foreign service of State Department, USAID, and now USDA, it's just completely relevant to what we're trying to do at the Bunch Center and what we're trying and at Howard. And so what I'm trying to do, what we as a team are trying to do, is bring Howard along in this journey of comprehensive internationalization. So recognizing where all of our courses are that have global content and lifting them up, highlighting them, saying very intently, this is a course that is global in nature. It is making sure that our students can study abroad. Study abroad so Black was the campaign we came up with a few years ago, that if you go to that hashtag, particularly on Instagram, you will see images of mostly Black students who are out in the world. Not all of them are Howard students, because this is a movement. We want everybody to use it, because we want as many Black people, as Black students, young Black people, to see that they also can go to Dubai. They can go to Nigeria. They can go to Spain. They can go to Argentina. They can go to Fiji. And so, we just want them to know that the world is available to them, and they should not fear it. They should embrace it and set forth. So, we try to encourage that. We bring people to campus to talk about any and every kind of global issue. We have an annual series. This year, we're focused on India. So we've been working with the Embassy of India this year to highlight different things about India throughout the academic year. But we've done Cuba, we've done Colombia, we've done Russia. Howard is the only HBCU that offers Russian, and we've been offering it for 60 years. So, we're just trying to tell Howard's international story better, and Howard's international story is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. There's so much that has happened at Howard or from Howard that has touched the world in different ways. And I just want to tell that story better. So that's what we're trying to do.
I think I saw in one of your interviews, Howard's first international student was like 1870 from China.
3 of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's wild.
1870.
Yeah, because we started. Yeah. And when we had our 150th anniversary celebration a few years ago, there was an exhibit in the Howard Museum, and it was the ship's record of the 3 students from China getting off the ship, coming to Howard. They had it there, 1870, 3 years after Howard opened. Yeah.
So, okay, this is good. And so my next question, I think probably the most reasonable question, is why is this important, particularly internationalization and mobility? Because your job, and I know I read earlier too, it was about, helping to reshape, reimagine the international skeleton of the university, which I love that language, by the way. Like, why is that important and necessary for Howard, but also colleges and universities within the U.S.?
So, I think different universities have interest in this for different reasons, and I think that they have shifted over the years. Mm-hmm. And this is actually the direction that my research for my dissertation is going, is examining the history of HBCUs in this international space. I think over the years, international students have generated a lot of revenue for institutions once institutions realize that international students will pay for a U.S. education. But before there was that realization, Howard was the top university for international students of any university in the country. I only just learned this a few weeks ago. But in the late 50s and 60s, Howard had the largest international student population of any university in this country. And it wasn't for revenue generation. It was because Howard was one of the only places that international students could go. because the rest of the universities in this country, most of them, other than HBCUs, didn't allow, people to come because they were segregated. So Howard has always been inclusive. And I think most HBCUs have always been inclusive as opposed to exclusive, which is what the majority of other institutions in this country were. And so, I just been trying to rescue that history and lift it up and highlight the fact that Howard and other HBCUs were receiving international students at a time when international students were not allowed to go anywhere else. And that created this very rich fabric of international connections that go quite far back. But what that did was, and at that time, what was happening in the world was, decolonization movements on the African continent and in the Caribbean. And so Howard and other HBCUs played a huge role in that. And I think that's pretty common knowledge among historians. Maybe some higher ed people might know those stories, but the average person is not necessarily making the connection between decolonization movements on the continent and in the Caribbean and other places, India, and HBCUs, and what was happening in US foreign policy at the time. And so all of that is just, for me, it's like a gold mine of information and a justification in my mind for precisely why HBCUs should be heavily and deeply engaged in internationalization, international education writ large. Because for me, as I've explained on my personal journey, the connection with the African diaspora, the ability to communicate with Black people wherever they are, I think can and should lead and will lead to uplift for all of us. And so Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in Latin America, Black people on the continent, Black people who have since moved to all these other spaces, Europe, Asia, wherever we are, the more that we can be united in a collective, I think the better it will be for all of us. And so for me, that's why this is important at HBCUs. I don't want HBCUs to be so domestically focused that they can't see the larger picture of the impact that they have had on the world and continue to have on the world.
Let me ask you this, because I definitely agree, 1,000%, I really do. And what I'm struggling with internally right now, hearing you speak about internationalization of HBCUs, is how do we, and I say we, even though I'm a student in Maryland, but I got your back, Dr. T. So how do we do this without commodifying international students, right? Particularly within the HBCU setting? Or how do we do this or remaining socially just in our practice to continue to ensure that HBCUs are the leaders in comprehensive internationalization?
Absolutely. This is a great question, because that's exactly what has happened, I think, in the broader higher ed landscape. But that's not necessarily what was happening before. And so I think that if there's a couple of things, I think if HBCUs stay true to their mission of educating those least well-served domestically and internationally, that will allow us to do that. I think there has to be some space for people to pay full price, the ones that can afford it, so that those who can't afford it, have an ability to attend. But governments have money as well for their students. And so figuring out, because, so many of these other schools, these PWIs, they have these relationships with other countries' governments, and those governments sponsor scholarships for students. So I think it's not unrealistic to figure out a way to get governments to pay for, and they do already. We have students who are here at Howard on government scholarships from their countries, but I think that there are more countries that can do that. But I also think that we should be exploring more direct exchange programs so that students, maybe they don't come for a whole degree, but maybe they come for a semester or a year from, another university somewhere. And I also think the private sector is going to have to step up, because this is an issue of equity globally. And there are a lot of companies making a lot of money on a lot of people, and those companies need employees at some point, and they should be looking for employees with cultural competencies, global experience. So a multinational company that's operating in Ecuador, they should want to send Afro-Ecuadorians to the United States to get a degree at an HBCU, learn English, and then go back to Ecuador. And then they can work for one of these companies or start their own. But if they work for the company can pay for their degree. So I think there's lots of creative ways. It will take a lot of legwork, and it will take a commitment from different stakeholders in different places. I think it's doable. So I'm gonna try to do it.
You're gonna do it, and you're already doing it. And the fact that you're even thinking about this reflects that. But I want to pivot just a little bit before coming back and combining the two and talk about your research. And before we even get into your research interests and how that's even evolved over the last 3 years, let alone last 3 months, like, why a PhD?
So I don't know why. No, I do know. When I started at Howard, actually, I was just telling one of my colleagues this story this morning. But when I came to Howard, I was like, I don't need a PhD. I did an undergraduate honors thesis that I had to defend, very much like a PhD. I had to convene a committee and defend it, oral defense and all that in undergrad. And I was like, why would anybody want to do this again? Goodness gracious. But my advisor, my chair, we can say, for that was one of my mentors. And she made me work. She made me work on that thesis, and it was painful. But at the end, when I was done, it was so beautiful to see this product that I had created, like live and in the flesh. And so I was like, I don't want to do that anytime soon again, but I might want to do that again, because that feels really good at the end. Mm-hmm. The process was very painful, but the product at the end was lovely. And so when I got to Howard, it was on my mind, but I wasn't sure what to do it in. I didn't know what to do it in. And I was toying with doing it in political science. So I was like, I don't want to do it in political science. Like, there are things that I would do, but it'd really just be for the sake of doing a PhD. But when Howard created this higher education leadership and policy studies at minority serving institutions PhD program, and they described it as a scholar practitioner program, then I was like, oh, this is like y'all were reading my mind, because that is exactly what I wanted to do. And so, and the other thing that really got me was my first year working at Howard, President Obama was a commencement speaker. And I remember going to that commencement, and I don't know if you're familiar with The Long Walk, but that's the name of a book that tells the whole history of Howard. It's called The Long Walk, and it refers to the walk from the fine arts building to the stage of commencement. And I was like, I want to take that long walk. I want that walk. I want the walk, because the pomp and circumstance of a Howard commencement, really a Howard anything, but a Howard commencement, the pomp and circumstance is on a whole other level, and it will make you want to do things that you never thought that you would want to do. And I want to walk across that stage on the yard at commencement at Howard University. And I needed the Howard paper. I had the small liberal arts college. I had the large PWI. I needed an HBCU on my resume, and I wanted it to be a Howard one. And so so those are the different reasons why the PhD. And I mean, ultimately, in this field, I had not thought that I needed to be a scholar. I was really focused on being a practitioner, but having been in the program now, I'm about to finish my coursework. It is like the scholarship is so important. And I'm really glad that I did it. I'm a little bit sad that it's almost over, but I'm really excited about writing the dissertation now that I have some clarity, because you asked what that is about.
Mm-hmm.
It was really fuzzy when I started the program. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I study abroad is like where my heart is, but I am also, I also recognize that internationalization is not only study abroad. And I have become increasingly more interested in the full internationalization story more than just the study abroad. The study abroad is a really tangible activity that's easy to encourage. It's easy to get excited about. So it's easy, but it's not a full story, and it does not achieve everything for the institution or for the students. And so I wanted to look more deeply, but I also knew that social justice had to be involved somewhere, somehow. And I was toying with how study abroad and foreign language learning. So if you had asked me the first 3 years of my PhD program, I would have answered the question with, oh yeah, I'm going to write my dissertation about social justice and how study abroad and foreign language learning lead to, I don't know, collective uplift of Black people across the diaspora or something like that. Again, tying to the story of, my story of the language learning and all of that, because that's what I was experiencing. That's what I was feeling. But after I took this course at Maryland this summer with the formidable Taylor Woodman, who is a rock star, I just need to give a shout out right there, a very loud one. It was talking with him that helped me really get clarity around what exactly it is that I need to focus my research on. And then talking to just some other people, some friends, who were scholars. I was a history minor in undergrad, so I'm like a frustrated historian as well. And so that's why all of this about the history of HBCUs and international education is like giving me life, because I'm a frustrated historian. And so that's where the research is going to go.
It's good. And shout out to T-Dub. That's the homie, Dr. T-Dub. That's the homie, man. I'll make sure you hear this podcast too. But the question I was going to ask you earlier, and I'm glad you kind of fleshed out, like reclaiming this history, particularly around international education at HBCUs, is like, what are your top 3 priorities now that you're doing both research and practice, right? Like, what are you always focused on, thinking about, considering in your daily work, but also your scholarship as well?
So I feel very fortunate to be at Howard and to really be supported. I think that the administration gets it. I'd like some more resources, but the time will come. But I really feel fortunate because they've really given me a lot of autonomy to do almost anything that I want around international education. And that's very fulfilling. So what I see is, I think Howard has a particular place in the HBCU landscape. And so that place is one, whether people like it or not, is one of leader. And so I like the ability to leverage Howard's name to advocate for international education and internationalization at all HBCUs. I feel like it's a responsibility of Howard to, because we're in DC and we have proximity to all the things to the State Department, to the World Bank, to all the embassies, all the things, all the think tanks, everything. We're very, very fortunate in that way. And as a result of that, a lot of things come to us first. And that's great. We appreciate it. But there are 104 other HBCUs that also should have access to these things. And some of them have more than others. Mm-hmm. But I believe very strongly that all HBCUs and all HBCU students should have access to the same things that we have access to at Howard. And so figuring out ways to do that and to keep the HBCUs connected, to get HBCU leadership to buy into the need for internationalization on their campus is something that I try to do. I'm not at every HBCU, but trying to figure out where my colleagues are and supporting them in the work that they're trying to do, I think will only make all of us better. So that's part of the reason the dissertation is not going to be about Howard. I'm not going to do my research about Howard. I'm not sure what I'm going to do my research about, which HBCU yet, but it's not going to be Howard. And so, just pulling out the stories of other schools and lifting those stories up and making sure the HBCU leadership hears the stories so that they can, make more informed decisions about what motivates them or what should motivate them to invest more intentionally in international education on their campuses and for their students.
Yeah, 2 points I immediately agree with. Number one is DC, it's a DMV. And I feel the same way about Maryland, particularly Maryland athletics. I'm like, if anyone's going to do international college athlete support the right way and injustice, it's going to be us. It's going to be Maryland. It's going to be us. And so I take that personally. And then when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, I don't play about that. But the second thing, which is why I love talking with you, is that we're both focused on this internationalization concept framework. You're taking an HBCU lens and I'm taking a college sport lens. But I think there's two lenses that have not been explored in ways that they should have been and continue to be ignored even in 2020, almost 2022. And so I just love hearing how you're talking and thinking about the intersection of internationalization HBCUs. I'm over here in sport, will someone please just listen to what I'm saying as it relates to what our role is, either passively or actively internationalization? Just one person, please. Just one person. Because there's many people in international ed focus on study abroad language learning. Many people in sport only focus on the mobility aspect. And I'm like, we are missing so much. Mm-hmm. So much. And so to your question earlier about why this podcast, no one's listening. No one listening. Unless we hop on Walk with TFB, take a walk together, no one's paying attention. I don't get it.
Well, look, because we have some international athletes at Howard. Howard. And I regularly ask the athletic my colleagues in the athletic department about international recruitment and so forth and what they're doing because so walk with me here. Black people globally are known. We have this reputation for being great athletes, right? Sure. And so we've got, the same thing happens across the diaspora, particularly in Latin America. Just for a moment, recall the World Cup. Mm-hmm. If you watch the World Cup and you look at all the teams, literally from every country in the world, they all have Black people on there. Mm-hmm. But I remember kind of early on when I started my my journey on race in Latin America, and I remember watching the World Cup, and I was like, wait a minute, what are these Black people in Honduras? My best friend from college was from Honduras. And I didn't know there was that many Black people in Honduras till I saw the Honduran national team that one year in the World Cup. And so then when I started thinking more deeply and looking at the teams, even in countries where you don't think there are any Black people like Argentina or Uruguay, all you got to do is scratch the surface and look at the history of the transatlantic slave trade brought them everywhere. And so the sports teams, so all the national teams of all those countries have all the Black people. And so again, the language, the sport, like we can get some of those folks here, get some here on our teams. They can get a great education. They can have this experience in the United States. They can go home, whether they continue in this sport or not. They've had this great foundation. I mean, you know, I don't like to, particularly in countries where the discrimination, and this is a lot in Latin America, discrimination is stereotyped. And so, you know, the stereotype of Black people only being able to be athletes or musicians, for me, is very problematic. However, Black people as athletes and musicians have also allowed a lot of Black people some upward mobility that, you know, other ways might have been not available to them. And so for me, it's a double-edged sword, but I also think that there's a lot of opportunity, particularly for Black people in sport in Latin America in particular, but just because that's where, you know, I focus, to have access to U.S. university education that will benefit. Like it's all connected is what I'm trying to say. It is all connected.
Dr. T, I need you to tell some people in DC that. Because for some reason, they don't listen to it. I'm not there. I need to study abroad and learn another language before they listen to me talk about internationalization, because sport does not seem to be as valued in other ways. I
don't get that. I mean, it's all connected.
You telling me.
Let's go.
You telling me.
Listen, the other hashtag that you be familiar with, you saw the world domination one, but the other one is Coconspirator, and I would like to co-conspire.
We're gonna do it, yo, and we're gonna do it. Because one thing I would say before taking us to segment 3 is that a lot, and really most of the international athlete research, obviously generalized, which is problematic, number one. But 2 of those that they're interviewing are coming from European countries or New Zealand and Australia. And so there's not even research on Black international athletes has been disaggregated to really learn more about their experience. I don't want to go down that route because I already have my topic and I'm not changing again because I already changed like twice now. But I am more than willing to engage in practice and consulting around what that can and should look like, both the HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions as well.
Well, look, when we both get our doctorate, then we got a whole series of articles we'll be writing together. So
that's fine. There
we go.
This is wide open, yo. But segment three, how can I, but also how can our podcast community best support you? What can we do?
Well, if you went to an HBCU, send a letter to your president and ask them what they're doing about I'm so serious.
Yeah.
Because HBCU leaders like to hear from their alumni. And if you could send a little check in it, even better, because they also like to hear from alumni who are giving. But no, engage with your HBCU if you went to one, find out what they're doing around international education. And if they're not doing anything, tell them that they should be. That would be a great help. Financial resources are always welcome. There is, obviously, you can send it to your HBCU, but if you didn't go to an HBCU but want to support HBCU students, there's the Fund for Education Abroad, which is an organization on whose board I sit, and they provide scholarships for underrepresented groups to study, students from underrepresented groups to be able to study abroad. Over 80% of whom thus far the recipients have been students of color. So they're doing phenomenal work to be able to overcome the privilege issue in study abroad and providing financial resources for students who otherwise will not be able to have this kind of experience. And the impact is very powerful when students can have this kind of experience in their college career. So they can give to Fund for Education Abroad. Social media is good. So you can follow the Bunch Center on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all 3 is good, and LinkedIn too. And, share far and wide everything that we put out there, because we've got a lot of interesting things that we share and we highlight, and join us for, some of our programming. A lot of stuff is available virtually, but some stuff is happening in person now. So all of that is good. Just raising visibility of the work that we're doing at Howard and other HBCUs, I just think is really important. So the more you share, the better for all of us.
Hashtag retweet, all of that.
All of that.
A question about what you just mentioned about LinkedIn, and I forgot to ask you this earlier. Why are you so active on LinkedIn?
You said why?
Yeah, because a lot of administrators are not, particularly on that platform.
I think LinkedIn is great. I think LinkedIn is good for the professional network. Facebook is for, more personal social stuff. Twitter is quick. Instagram is for the visuals. And LinkedIn is for your professional network. So I'm on LinkedIn. The things that I put on social media vary slightly depending on which of those platforms I'm using. But on LinkedIn, I think it's important. Here's my thing is you haven't done anything until you've told people that you've done it. Until it's known that it's been done, then you might as well have not done it. So for me, communications is an issue. No one is going to cheerlead for you if they don't know that you did anything. And so it's a fine line between being arrogant and like telling people just to tell them. But what I try to do on LinkedIn is I want people to know about the work that we are doing at the Bunch Center and some of the other things I'm involved in, like the Fund for Education Abroad, like the International Student House of Washington, D.C., which is an amazing organization that I didn't know anything about. And I grew up a block away from it my whole life. And it is an organization that was started in 1936. That was one of the only places in Washington, D.C., where students of color from all over the world could live in Washington, D.C. So, it's got this amazing social justice history and story that no one knows about. And so I'm trying to, again, raise the visibility. But if you don't tell, then no one knows. And so I just try to tell. The story. Communication is key.
I needed to hear that. Well, before we bounce, I got a few questions for you. These aren't too hard at all. The first question is one I forgot to ask you when you first jumped on. And that, what is bringing you joy right now?
What is bringing me joy right now? Right now, joy is that I have one paper left for this semester. That's what the joy is coming to me right now. And then I can relax a little bit before I get ready for comps. My kids are bringing me joy. And my students, this semester, my students have brought me a lot of joy. We've been doing these embassy walks. We walk from campus to a different embassy and have these great encounters and conversations on the way in the embassy and on the way back. And those have been phenomenal, like phenomenally joyful.
Look, I saw it on LinkedIn. I did see it. And I said, I'm coming next semester, preferably when it's warmer outside. I'm not a cold person. Late February, early March.
I understand.
Yeah, I don't like to bundle up. Bundle up. So I research athletics. So your favorite sports memory? Are the one you played in, participated in, witnessed in person?
Wow. That's a good question. I've got a lot of, I played sports. I played soccer and basketball in college. Oh, not college. Lord, no, not in college. In high school. And I like sports. One of my this is one. When I was living in South Africa, it was at the time that the West Indies was playing South Africa in, I believe it was the Cricket World. I don't know if it was a championship, but it was a series between the West Indies and South Africa in South Africa. And I didn't know anything about cricket, but I was determined to learn about cricket. And the 7-day match versus the 1-day match. But it was the West Indies, Black people, versus South Africa cricket team, which was mostly white at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, it was like South Africa wasn't a colonial power per se, but it was, it was like the Black people against the apartheid regime. And so even apartheid was over at the time, but nevertheless. Anyway, I wasn't there in person, but I just remember like the weight of that interaction, learning the sport, first of all, and then the meaning and the impact behind what it meant for the West Indies to be playing South Africa in this match. It was very interesting.
Did you say a 7-day match?
Yes. Cricket.
I'm gonna look into it. Don't even tell me. I'm gonna look into it. I'm gonna look into it. I just learned field hockey like the last year. I'll look into it.
Okay, we can have another conversation about cricket. Fascinating.
No, for real. This would be a good question too. Your top 5 musical artists. No rank, just top 5.
Oh, well, right now I'm feeling Adele, obviously, because like who isn't? But Prince, without question. And then I like a lot of Latin music, although I am also now interested in a lot of reggae. So Buju Banton. This is hard. I can't pick a 5. Prince, I know, but I feel like I can't stop at 5. Prince, Adele, Buju. Let's go ahead and put like, what are my Latin music people that I'm listening to right now? I mean, like, I don't even know.
You got Spotify?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. But I don't know who's gonna show up on. Is Latin music like a lot of Latin music. I like a lot of Latin music. Bachata, merengue, salsa. Oh, Mark Anthony. I just put out there.
Mark would count too. I'll add 5th one. Because I know you like Latin America, but I like Canadian artists. Like Drake, Bieber, Weeknd. Oh, never mind.
I mean, I like Weeknd, but I wouldn't put them in. I wouldn't put any of those in my top 5. No. Let's just oh my God, say Francisco Villalona. Let's say him. This is Dominican merengue.
Playlist.
But he's like a placeholder for a lot of other Dominican artists that
just cool.
I like.
Okay. What's my next question? Oh, if you could go to brunch, bottomless brunch, whatever brunch you want. I prefer bottomless. You plus 5 people. Who are you bringing?
I can bring 5 people from anywhere, anytime.
Anywhere, anytime.
They still gotta be alive. They gotta be alive, or are we gonna go back in time too?
Go back in time too.
Okay, this man right here. This is my great grandfather, John Hope. Which we didn't even get into that story. That's for another time.
I say that one. I'll let you finish. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I would love to be at a table with him. Let's see. These are hard questions. Actually, I would probably do a lot of family. I would do John Hope and my great grandmother, his wife, Eugenia. I would do my grandfather he's on my dad's side. On my grandfather on my mother's side, Harry Morris. I would do let me just do my whole family. My father, he passed away a year ago. But I'd like to have him at the table with all these people. So my dad, my mom, my dad, my grandfather, and my great grandparents. I would do those 5.
Actually a really good conversation. And I didn't want to bring President Hope up because That's gonna be a long conversation. If he was homeboys with WEB Du Bois for real, like they was like kicking it.
Hardcore. He brought Du Bois to Morehouse.
That's what I'm saying. What? There's gonna be part 2 next season. I already told you next season. The next season's theme is gonna be. So we'll bring you back for real next season 5 because I want to dive deeper into that, especially from a presidential mindset back in that time period.
No doubt.
That's good.
No doubt.
That's good. Okay. Well, last question for you. This should be probably equally as hard, but who do you want to see featured? Who do you want to see on and or hear from on this podcast?
Oh,
You have a global. Listen, I know a lot of people, but you know, like a lot of people times like 1,000.
Let's see. Probably some people in my program at Howard. I mean, I don't know how you do it. You should get the president of Howard on here. You get that?
You know them?
The president of Howard?
Like y'all cool?
Oh, I mean, you want an invitation? We can send him an invitation. He likes sports, so sports education. He's international himself, so that'd be a great guest.
Let's make that happen.
I think he'd have fun with this interview.
Let's make that happen. I mean, they on the list. Is there somebody else?
Let's see. I mean, people in my cohort at Howard, like a lot of people who I think are very interesting. Lindsay, who is in our little group, she's got a pretty interesting story and the international connection. Let me see. Oh, you know who also is good on sports? The president of Virginia State University, Makula Abdullah.
You know them too? You can make something shake.
I can try. That one I'm less sure of, but I could try. But you saw his video where he schooled that young man on the basket, like right after you saw that? You remember that?
Yeah. Okay.
You could do like a whole little leadership series. Just reach out to all the, reach out to like Rosalind artists down at Benedict and shoot, I'd love to hear from Ruth Simmons at Prairie View, see what her take is on. It can be a great opportunity to get them to talk about these things that you want them to talk about, that you say people aren't listening to you about.
I'm just
get the presidents on your podcast.
You said Virginia State. Yeah, I'm working on Dr. Tate right now, LSU. Dr. Tate, if you hear this, I need you on the podcast. Virginia State, Howard. So, good. Okay. Any last words you want to share with the people before we bounce? Before we head out?
This has been very fun. I appreciate the invitation. Study abroad so black.
Simple enough, yo. Simple enough. Several things before we head out. One, I've never had someone tell me to walk with them on my own podcast, so thank you. That's the first. Two, the long walk. You're on the walk, you continue to walk, and definitely can't wait to help you celebrate once you finish. But last but not least, right, you said connecting people is your thing, part of your purpose. So I'm glad Dr. T-Dub got us connected. Glad you and I are connected and look forward to being co-conspirators, not just internationalization, but really in the DMV, because there's work to be done, and we're going to do it.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
We're going to do it. For everyone else, thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of Walk with TFB. I look forward to having more unfiltered conversations with authentic people, centered on education, sport, and culture as we progress throughout season 4. But as always, until then, walk with me.